So today we will look at some exam practice for organic chemistry. Okay, before that, I would like to show you different exam papers, mostly the marking scheme, because you will see how it's useful to use all of the exam boards for your own practice. And we'll see also what's the benefit for for each exam board, because they're quite different in terms of marking scheme, even if of course the content it's really similar, just very few differences in terms of like few reactions and reagents that you need to know, but the differences are really minimal, so that is not an excuse for not using different exam board for the practice. And I think one of the very useful one is the AQA. And I'm looking at paper 2 just because that's the organic one. So a lot of the AS content of organic chemistry will come up in this paper, but also in paper 2 of the other exam boards. But this is particularly useful because of the introduction that it has. In fact, the marking scheme, well, apart from a guidance, which is for examiners. So imagine that if you know the how to mark the paper, it means that you also know how to answer the questions. That's why it's really worth it to read through it and so understand a bit the marking point, the procedure, for example, for calculations, if errors are carried forward. But I think the most important, the useful thing about organic chemistry was here, about the reagent. Okay, because this, it tells you like mistakes that you can avoid. Okay, so we can really prevent losing marks. In fact, if we look at reagents, it says, well, the question that will have identify, identify would be the command word. In fact, when we do questions, it's really useful to look at the command words, okay? So identify is the one for reagents. So if we need to identify, we can either name, the reagent or the formula in the answer, okay? So the definition of a reagent is, well, is that a reagent is a chemical which can be taken out of a bottle or a container. But this is relevant because of the of this. So they won't give credit if, for example, the reagent is potassium cyanide, because that's the thing that you can actually take out from the bottle, as it said here. But if you mention just the ion, okay, or if you say hydroxide ion instead of sodium hydroxide, okay. Another one would be using silver with ammonia like this, instead of ammonical silver nitrate instead of tolerance reagent. Okay, so this is really useful because if you're asked to identify a reagent, you need to write the whole formula rather than the ion or actually the nucleophile or electrophile, which instead is what you will need in the in for example, a mechanism. Okay, so that's useful to know, in my opinion. Then another useful part that I think would be good to read this through, of course, it's a bit long, but I would suggest you to take your time to take an AQA marking scheme and read through it, because this is the how to write the organic structure. So to prevent losing marks, we can look at a few examples that which ones are allowed and which one are not allowed. So it will be allowed, for example, if you write like a mix of displayed and the structure formula, when you don't write all of the bonds out, but just the group. Yeah, but notice what is not allowed: if the order of the carbon groups is wrong. Not allowed would be for the hydroxide. Yeah, if it's attached, or the hydroxyl group, if it's attached to the carbon, this would specifically tell you that is the hydrogen attached to the carbon, so that would be wrong. Yeah, instead it would be the oxygen that needs to be written. Same concept for for the nitrate. Okay, while for the ones with the hydrogen, somehow they don't really allow, because it's like a group of elements, I would say, that are bonded. So it's like if this is considering being a kind of structural formula. Okay, but then notice they're quite picky with the cyanide group, that is the carbon attached to the carbon, not the nitrogen. Carboxylic acid, it has to be written with the carbon attached to the other carbon, as well as all of the other carbonyl functional groups. Okay, so that's, I would say, quite interesting. Then, well, you would have some example of some structures and naming. In fact, there is a big list here of the organic names that are allowed. Okay, so I think it's good to look through it to understand a little bit what type of naming are required, and so it could be also a good revision for organic names. The other interesting part is about the mechanisms, because notice how they are very specific with the curly arrows. Okay, in fact, the curly arrow it says should originate from a lone pair of electrons or from a bond. Okay, so that's very important. So it's not, so this should not gain a credit and will be penalized. Okay, so notice that the mistakes in this one. Here is not the carbon giving electrons to the bromine, but they would come from the bond. Okay, so it's always from a lone pair of electrons or from a bond. So here we don't need to write the electron in the bond. It would just be from the bond. Okay, notice how this, if you write it like this, it would not be correct because it doesn't originate from the lone pair. Okay, so they're quite picky in terms of mechanism, so it's useful to learn it the right way. Okay, and then that is, I think, the key points of organic chemistry. Then, of course, you can read through about the extended responses, because you need to understand when you have an open question, what are the key points, that they're looking for in general terms, like for the level. It means like getting a level 3 question answer is when you get the 5 or 6 marks, and normally they look for like a clear, concise, logical description of whatever the question is. Okay, so here just to say how this marking scheme, specifically the AQA, is really useful because it gives you a lot of key points on organic chemistry. Okay, as well as the general exam skill for different exam boards. Okay, the marking scheme itself, it doesn't have so many information. I mean, it's still useful. For example, if you look at additional comments, additional information, if they allow different things, so it's always useful to look at these additional guidelines. Okay, but it could be limited in terms of explanation. Okay, while for the for actually this one I wanted to look at, the Edexcel one, it doesn't have such a big introduction and detailed introduction, but it's useful for multiple choice questions because it has also why some options are not correct. Okay, so it's really useful. Yeah, this exam board, I would say more for the multiple choices. Okay, even though the marking scheme normally is quite nice and clear, even in terms of structure. While the OCR exam board is a bit more limited, but you have the element here, the AO element, which remember is it's relative to if it's applying a knowledge or demonstrate knowledge or interpretation. So this is useful because if you're unsure what the question is asking, you can actually look at the element and go in the specification and look at, okay, so what is asking me to do? Okay, so that's always useful. In fact, you have it in all of the marking scheme, all of the marks. So that's quite useful. Okay.